Miriam Okeke was the kind of wife every man prayed for, yet few truly appreciated. She had married Chukwudi when he was nothing but a struggling contractor with dusty shoes, unpaid debts, and endless promises of a brighter tomorrow. While others mocked her for tying herself to a dreamer, Miriam saw in him a man who only needed faith and a chance. She pawned her late father's treasured gold wristwatch to pay for his first building permit, sold her jewelry to help him bribe corrupt officials who withheld contracts, and even went as far as kneeling before her wealthy uncle to plead for a loan that would later build Chukwudi's first set of apartments. All through these years, she endured hunger with him, sometimes skipping meals so that he could eat and have the strength to work on construction sites. She bore the ridicule of neighbors who called her a fool for suffering in marriage, while younger women enjoyed the comfort of men with steady incomes. Yet Miriam never complained. She was the kind of woman whose dignity was her armor. When the children asked why they couldn't have the toys their friends had, she would smile and tell them that their father was working hard to give them something greater. She washed his shirts by hand even when she was exhausted, rose at dawn to prepare his meals, and whispered prayers over him as he slept. When contracts finally began rolling in and money flowed like never before, Miriam believed her sacrifices had not been in vain. She thought they had crossed the wilderness together and were stepping into their promised land. She had no idea she was standing on shifting sand, that the very man she had sacrificed everything for was already looking beyond her, searching for thrills that her loyalty and humility could never compete with. Unknown to Miriam, the foundation of her marriage had begun to crack long before success came. Chukwudi, intoxicated by the sudden respect and admiration he received in Enugu, began to feel that his wife no longer fit into the image of the big man he was becoming. Miriam still wrapped herself in simple ankara, tied scarves around her head, and walked with the modest gait of a woman raised with values. But in Chukwudi's eyes, this was no longer the image of the wife of a millionaire. He began to hunger for something louder, flashier, and more daring, a hunger that would soon lead him into the arms of women who would stroke his ego, poison his mind, and ultimately bury the very empire Miriam helped him build. Long before Titi entered the picture, there was Ngozi, the first woman to test the strength of Chukwudi's vows. Unlike Miriam's quiet elegance, Ngozi was flamboyant, bold, and reckless with her words. She had been his mistress during the early years of his wealth, and though their affair never reached the ears of Miriam, whispers followed him like shadows in Enugu. Ngozi loved to flaunt her position. She would stroll into high-end lounges with handbags that Chukwudi bought and laugh loudly with friends about how a village wife was at home cooking while she enjoyed champagne. To her, Miriam was nothing more than a weak woman holding onto a man she no longer controlled. Though Chukwudi eventually ended things with Ngozi, partly because she became too demanding and partly because his growing image required something fresher, Ngozi never forgave him for discarding her. She still held secrets about his shady deals, and she wielded them like a sword whenever she felt overlooked. In Enugu circles, Ngozi was the type of woman you didn't cross, for her tongue was sharper than any blade. She boasted that she had been the one who pushed Chukwudi to take risks, that without her, he would have still been a small-time builder chasing crumbs. Friends warned Chukwudi to tread carefully, but he brushed it off. He was too arrogant to believe Ngozi could hurt him. He believed he was untouchable. Yet deep down, he hated that Ngozi still mocked him in public, reminding everyone that she once had power over him. It was this bitterness that made him crave a new relationship, not just for passion, but for revenge. Ngozi's bitterness lingered like smoke, seeping into his pride. She would show up uninvited at events, throw veiled insults at him, and even whisper rumors about his marriage just to embarrass him. Miriam, naive and unsuspecting, dismissed these things as idle gossip, but in reality, Ngozi was planting seeds that would later bloom into chaos. For Chukwudi, the solution was not to repair his marriage or cut ties completely. Instead, he decided to bury Ngozi under a spectacle so grand that it would erase her from the conversation forever. That decision led him straight into the arms of Titi, the woman who would finally destroy him. Titi was everything Miriam was not, and everything Ngozi once pretended to be. Young, vibrant, ambitious in the most selfish way, and unashamed of her desires. She was the kind of woman who believed men were meant to be used, not loved. She dressed in bright colors, dripped in makeup, and carried herself with the confidence of a queen who had never tasted shame. When Chukwudi met her, it was at a car dealership, where she was loudly haggling over a luxury SUV. She looked at him, smiled with calculated charm, and within minutes had disarmed him with her boldness. Unlike Miriam's gentle tone or Ngozi's sharp tongue, Titi knew how to flatter in ways that pierced straight into a man's pride. She mocked Ngozi, calling her old news, and she mocked Miriam, dismissing her as a housewife who doesn't even know the color of her husband's soul. She told Chukwudi that for a man of his stature, he was still living like a commoner, and that if he truly wanted to be remembered, he needed to build something unforgettable, not for himself, not for his wife, but for her. She knew exactly where to press. His ego, his rivalry with Ngozi, and his unspoken resentment toward Miriam. Chukwudi, intoxicated by her fire, felt like a man reborn. He started sneaking around more, spending nights in her apartment, and throwing money into her hands as though it were sand. But Titi was not satisfied with trips, cars, or cash. She wanted something monumental, something that would make every other woman in Enugu jealous. And so one night, while lying across his chest, she whispered the idea that would change everything. Build me a mall. Let it stand so tall that Ngozi will choke on her jealousy, and your boring wife will realize she was never your true partner. Chukwudi's heart raced at the thought. A mall would not only silence Ngozi, but also establish Titi as the woman who had succeeded where Miriam failed. It would be his ultimate act of defiance, his proof of manhood, though in truth it was the first shovel of soil over his own grave. The more Chukwudi thought about it, the more the mall became an obsession. He envisioned it standing tall in the heart of Enugu, a glass fortress of shops, cinemas, restaurants, and boutiques. He imagined Titi's name embossed on a golden plaque for all to see, a declaration that she had succeeded in taking what no one else could. For him, the mall wasn't just about love or lust. It was war against Ngozi's tongue, war against Miriam's quiet dignity, and war against the whispers that said he was only who he was because of the women in his life. He began moving money, secretly. Contracts that should have been reinvested into his company were funneled into private accounts. He mortgaged the family home under Miriam's nose, assuring her that it was just a small loan for expansion. He liquidated shares she had worked hard to invest in, telling her they needed fast cash for a big deal. Miriam, still trusting, accepted his explanations, though her instincts whispered unease. She noticed how quickly he snapped at her now, how he dismissed her input, and how he returned home smelling of perfumes that weren't hers. But she refused to believe her husband could betray her so deeply, until the walls of the mall began to rise. Meanwhile, Titi stoked the fire. She flaunted designs of the mall to her friends, whispering that it would soon make her the most powerful woman in town. She deliberately invited Ngozi to parties just to taunt her with hints of what was coming. "You thought you were special," she sneered at Ngozi one night, "but wait until you see what a real man builds for me." Ngozi, enraged, began plotting her own revenge, while Miriam unknowingly prayed for her husband's success, asking God to bless the very project that would ruin her marriage. By now, Chukwudi was living a double life, so tangled that even he could barely keep his lies straight. To Miriam, he was still the hard-working husband fighting to secure contracts. To Ngozi, he was the man who discarded her, now too desperate to silence her rumors. And to Titi, he was the fool willing to bleed himself dry just to prove she was worth more than every other woman in his past. Every day he dug deeper into debt, but instead of pulling back, he doubled down. He sold his cars, mortgaged more properties, and borrowed from dangerous lenders, all to keep construction moving. Miriam noticed bills piling up at home, school fees unpaid, and food money stretched thin. Whenever she asked, he waved her off angrily, saying she was ungrateful and did not understand the level of deals he was handling. She cried silently at night, confused at how the man she once knew had turned into a stranger in expensive suits. She had no idea that while her children were being sent home for unpaid fees, her husband was pouring millions into a mall that would carry another woman's name. Meanwhile, Ngozi's bitterness reached boiling point. She began spreading rumors that Chukwudi had abandoned his wife for a younger girl, fueling Enugu's gossip mills. But what made it worse was that Titi herself fed those rumors, boasting openly that a man was building her a mall just to prove his love. Soon, the city buzzed with the story, yet Miriam, the woman at the center of it all, remained the only one in the dark. She was the last to know she was fighting shadows that had already swallowed her husband whole. Ngozi was not a woman to be cast aside without consequences. Once she discovered that Chukwudi was pouring his fortune into building a mall for Titi, rage consumed her. To her, it was not just betrayal, it was humiliation. She had invested years into him, whispered advice that helped him secure contracts, even connected him to influential people, when he was nothing more than an ambitious dreamer. Now he dared to discard her, as though she was a soiled rag, and replace her with a younger, brasher version of herself. Everywhere she went, she told anyone who cared to listen that Chukwudi was a fool blinded by lust, that Titi was a shallow girl who would destroy him, and that his wife was nothing but a blind puppet too docile to see her own destruction. These words spread like wildfire, and the more they circulated, the more Chukwudi's pride was wounded. Ngozi's bitterness was not without strategy. She threatened to expose his fraudulent dealings during his rise, the bribes he paid, the government tenders he manipulated, the money laundering he dipped into when contracts failed. Though she had never made these things public before, she now threatened to drag him into the mud unless he paid her heavily to keep her mouth shut. Chukwudi tried to pacify her with cash at first, but it only made her bolder. She appeared at construction sites, mocking Titi in front of workers, saying, "You will eat and eat until his pocket's dry, and then you'll dump him like he dumped me." Titi, infuriated, fired back with venomous insults, calling Ngozi an expired product. The war between the mistresses began to overshadow the progress of them all. Yet Chukwudi foolishly believed he could silence them both while still pressing forward. Meanwhile, Miriam, oblivious to the storm raging around her, noticed her husband's growing irritability. He became quick to anger, snapping at the children for the smallest things. His late nights grew longer, his lies more careless, and yet, out of love and loyalty, Miriam continued to shield them. She told their children their father was under stress from work, unaware that his stress came not from contracts, but from juggling two vindictive women, one who wanted to ruin him and another who wanted to own him. While Enugu gossiped about the drama, Miriam carried herself with quiet dignity, the only one blind to the scandal unfolding in her own marriage. The first real crack Miriam could not ignore came when uniformed bank officials arrived at their gate carrying eviction papers. She stood frozen as they handed her documents showing that the family house had been mortgaged and now stood on the brink of repossession. Her heart pounded as her eyes scanned the words she could barely process. This was the house she had sacrificed for, the home she had helped build, the roof under which she bore her children. Now, without her knowledge, it was slipping through her fingers. In panic, she rushed to her husband's office to demand answers, but what she received instead was a slap so fierce it made her ears ring. For the first time in their marriage, Chukwudi raised his hand against her, his eyes burning with a mixture of guilt and rage. "Don't ever question me again," he barked. "Everything in this house is mine." That single act shattered something inside Miriam. Though her cheek burned with pain, her soul burned with something deeper, betrayal. She realized then that the man she had trusted completely was not the same man standing before her. His arrogance, his pride, and his obsession with something she could not yet name had taken him far away from the husband she once knew. But instead of fighting back, she gathered her children, packed what little she could, and left. Pride would not let her stay under a roof where her sacrifices were mocked and her dignity trampled. She took refuge in her mother's modest bungalow, her children squeezed into one small room, her life reduced to survival. While Miriam cried in silence, Titi laughed in triumph. She paraded herself in new cars bought with Chukwudi's money, boasting to her friends that she was the reason his village wife was homeless. Ngozi, equally bitter, spread the story in her own way, telling everyone how a once proud Miriam had been thrown out like trash. Enugu feasted on the scandal, but what struck the deepest blow was that Chukwudi did not come for his wife. He did not beg her to return. Instead, he sank deeper into Titi's world, convincing himself that once the mall was completed, all the humiliation would fade, and he would be the king once again. Enugu became a battlefield where Titi and Ngozi clashed with venomous tongues. Titi, drunk with power, bragged loudly that she was about to own the biggest mall in town, a gift from Chukwudi that would silence all other women. She called herself the queen of Enugu retail, even before the mall was complete, attending social events draped in gold and diamonds, all purchased with money meant for Chukwudi's family. Ngozi, unable to stomach the insult, fought back with words sharper than knives. She taunted Chukwudi in public, laughing that he had become nothing more than Titi's fool. "I warned you," she sneered one evening at a lounge. "That girl will finish you. By the time she's done, you'll crawl back to your wife with nothing but rags." The public spectacle amused Enugu's gossip-hungry crowd. Newspapers hinted at Chukwudi's scandalous love triangle, while neighbors whispered that Miriam was suffering because her husband's pride could not fit into one woman's arms. Miriam, though humiliated by the gossip, kept her silence. She refused to explain, refused to plead, and refused to let her pain be turned into a circus for strangers. Instead, she focused on her children, scrubbing floors, washing clothes, and doing small trading to keep them in school. Her quiet strength became her shield, even as both Titi and Ngozi mocked her as though she were invisible. Chukwudi, blinded by his obsession, refused to see the storm brewing. He convinced himself that once the mall opened, all mouths would close. He ignored the reality that his home was broken, his wife displaced, and his former mistress bent on revenge. He saw only Titi's painted smile and the shimmering walls of a mall that was consuming his entire fortune. Little did he know that Titi's laughter was not laughter of love, but of conquest, and that Ngozi's threats were not idle words, but seeds of destruction that would soon bear fruit in the most public and humiliating way. The mall rose like a crown jewel in the center of Enugu. Glass panels gleamed under the sun, steel frames reached for the sky, and every passerby stopped to stare at the towering structure. To the city, it was a marvel, proof of Chukwudi's wealth and vision. To Titi, it was her throne, the monument that would cement her as the woman who defeated both Ngozi and Miriam. She spent hours at the construction site, ordering workers around as though she owned it, posting pictures online with captions like, "Dreams become reality when you are loved by the right man." Her followers cheered her on, feeding her arrogance, while gossip blogs speculated on the identity of the lucky woman who was about to own such a mall. Ngozi watched with seething anger. Every new floor built was a slap to her pride. She stormed into the site one afternoon, shouting at Titi in front of workers, "You think this will last? You're nothing but a distraction. He built apartments with me. Now he's building glass for you. Tomorrow he'll find another." Titi, unbothered, laughed in her face, hissing, "The difference is mine will carry my name." Their fight became entertainment for the workers, who whispered that the great Chukwudi was enslaved by women. News of the altercation spread quickly, further fueling Enugu's appetite for gossip. Meanwhile, Miriam walked past the mall one evening on her way from selling vegetables. Her children tugged at her wrapper, marveling at the glittering structure. She smiled faintly, but her eyes burned with tears. She did not know it was her husband's project. To her, it was simply another man's dream rising from the ground. Had she known the truth, that her husband was bleeding their future into the ground just to feed another woman's vanity, her heart would have shattered beyond repair. For now, she held on to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, her husband was working toward something that would one day bring them stability again. Behind the shimmering walls and grand designs, a silent betrayal was being inked into reality. Titi, cleverer than Chukwudi realized, had partnered with Chief Agbo, a seasoned rival in the real estate world. Together, they devised a plan that would ensure the mall would never truly belong to Chukwudi. They prepared documents disguised as tax and partnership papers, filled with legal traps and clauses he could not decipher. Every time Chukwudi signed, thinking he was protecting his investment, he was unknowingly signing away his rights. Piece by piece, he handed over ownership until the mall legally became Titi and Chief Agbo's property. Titi played her role perfectly. She soothed him with sweet words, pressed her head against his chest as he signed, and told him he was the greatest man she had ever known. She stroked his ego, told him he was different from every man she had ever met, and promised him loyalty if he just trusted her. Chukwudi, intoxicated by the validation, signed without question. He did not hire a lawyer, did not seek advice, did not doubt the woman who had already replaced both wife and ex-mistress in his heart. In truth, he was not building his empire. He was digging his grave, brick by brick, signature by signature. Ngozi, however, caught wind of the scheme. Through her old connections, she discovered Chief Agbo's involvement and the documents that stripped Chukwudi of his rights. For once, she almost pitted him. But instead of warning him, she decided to sit back and watch the show. She had warned him many times that Titi would destroy him. Now, she would let the entire city see him humiliated. As the mall neared completion, the stage was set for the most spectacular downfall Enugu had ever witnessed. And Miriam, still in the dark, continued to whisper prayers for a husband who was already orchestrating his own ruin. The day of the grand opening was like nothing Enugu had seen in years. Bright canopies lined the plaza, red carpets stretched across the forecourt, and politicians, businessmen, and socialites gathered in their best outfits to witness the unveiling of what was rumored to be the most sophisticated mall in the region. Music boomed from loudspeakers, dancers entertained guests, and the smell of expensive champagne filled the air. Chukwudi stood tall in an imported Italian suit, his chest swelling with pride as cameras flashed around him. In his heart, this was the day he would silence his enemies, Ngozi, with her bitter tongue, Miriam, with her quiet dignity, and every gossip who ever doubted his rise. He imagined the look of awe on their faces when they saw them all, his crowning glory. Titi, dressed in a gold gown that sparkled under the sun, held his arm possessively, waving at the crowd as though she were already queen of Enugu. She kissed him on the cheek, in front of the cameras, basking in her victory. What Chukwudi didn't know was that Ngozi had slipped into the crowd, her lips curved in a mocking smile, waiting for the moment she had long anticipated. Miriam, too, had been dragged there by her neighbors, who whispered cruelly, "Come and see what your husband has been building for another woman." She stood at the back, her wrapper playing, her children holding her hands, her heart pounding as she tried to make sense of why she had been summoned. When the moment came, the crowd hushed. A velvet cloth was pulled back to reveal the golden plaque mounted on the glass wall of the mall. Chukwudi's eyes widened in horror, his body stiffening as though struck by lightning. The plaque did not carry his name as he expected. Instead, it glimmered with cruel finality. Titi Plaza, owned by Titi and Associates. The gasp that followed rippled through the crowd like a wave. People murmured, fingers pointed, and laughter erupted from corners. Chukwudi's pride collapsed in an instant, replaced by confusion and dread. Titi, without missing a beat, smiled even wider, holding up her hands as though she had just been crowned queen. Ngozi's laughter pierced the air, a shrill reminder of the past. Miriam swayed where she stood, her knees weak, before fainting into the arms of neighbors. The humiliation was complete, and the cameras captured it all. The aftermath of the unveiling was chaos. Chukwudi lunged at Titi in front of the cameras, grabbing her arm and demanding answers, but she pulled away with practiced ease, whispering through a smile, "You signed it all to me, darling. It was always mine." Chief Agbo stepped forward from the crowd, adjusting his agbada, and placed a possessive hand on Titi's shoulder. The symbolism was brutal. The rival businessman had been part of the betrayal all along. The crowd gasped again, this time louder, as realization sank in. Chukwudi had been played like a fool. Ngozi, unable to contain her delight, spat in his direction and hissed, "Didn't I warn you?" You left me for this snake, and now see how she has buried you alive." Her laughter mingled with the murmurs of the crowd, each note slicing deeper into his pride. Titi, emboldened, mocked him openly. "You thought you were the king? You were nothing but a stepping stone. I let you build it, I let you pay, and now it's mine." This is what happens when a man thinks with pride instead of wisdom. The crowd erupted in laughter, and cameras captured every moment. Chukwudi tried to shout above the noise, but his voice cracked, his authority gone. Politicians who had shaken his hand minutes earlier turned away to avoid association. Friends he once boasted with disappeared into the crowd. In that moment, he stood utterly alone, stripped of wealth, power, and respect. At the back of the gathering, Miriam regained consciousness, her head spinning. When she opened her eyes and saw her husband standing broken in front of the entire city, she felt no pity, only a hollow ache. She realized, with devastating clarity, that this mall was not just another business venture. It was the monument of her husband's betrayal, the reason her children had gone hungry, the reason she had lost her home. Tears blurred her vision, but she stood, gathered her children, and turned her back on him. She walked away silently, refusing to watch the man she once loved reduced to public ridicule. For her, this was no longer her husband. It was a stranger who had chosen pride over family. News of the disaster spread faster than fire. By the next morning, every corner of Enugu buzzed with the story of the big man, who built a mall for his mistress only to have it stolen from him in front of the whole city. Gossip blogs ran headlines like "From King to Clown," "Chukwudi's Fall from Grace," while street vendors turned the story into jokes that customers repeated with laughter. In bars, men clinked glasses as they mocked him. In salons, women shook their heads, using Miriam's suffering as a cautionary tale. Children sang rhymes about the man who built a palace for another man's queen. His once proud name became a byword for foolishness. Chukwudi could not escape the humiliation. Wherever he went, whispers followed. Old business associates refused his calls. His siblings, who once begged him for help, now mocked him, saying he had finally reaped what he sowed. Banks, sensing his weakness, moved swiftly to seize his assets. Cars were repossessed, land confiscated, and even the apartment blocks Miriam had helped finance were auctioned. Within weeks, he was reduced to a shadow of the man he once was. He roamed the streets in the same city where he had once been hailed as a titan, now sneered at as a fool. Titi, meanwhile, basked in her brief victory, throwing parties in her new mall with Chief Agbo by her side. She paraded around as though she had conquered the world, but even in her triumph, cracks began to show. Workers whispered about her extravagance, about how she drained money recklessly, about how Chief Agbo's eyes were already wandering. Ngozi, though satisfied, still taunted both of them in private, telling anyone who would listen that this was only the beginning of the end. Miriam, on the other hand, carried her dignity quietly, refusing to speak about the scandal. She focused on survival, knowing deep down that the storm had not yet finished its work. Karma was still circling, waiting for the perfect strike. Desperation drove Chukwudi to a place he once vowed never to return, Miriam's mother's house. It was a rainy night when he staggered up to the old bungalow, drenched, barefoot, and trembling. His once polished suit was torn, his wristwatch gone, and his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. He knocked frantically on the wooden door, his voice breaking as he called, "Miriam! Miriam, please, open the door. It's me." When the door creaked open, Miriam stood there in a faded wrapper, her children peering from behind her legs. For a moment, he thought she would embrace him. Instead, her eyes turned cold, her lips pressed tight as stone. He fell to his knees in the mud, sobbing, "Please forgive me. I've lost everything. Titi betrayed me, Ngozi mocked me, and the whole city laughs at me. But you are my wife. Please take me back." His voice cracked with desperation, but Miriam did not bend. She looked down at him, her face unreadable, and replied with words that cut deeper than any knife. "You once said your children were a burden. Today, they do not know their father. Leave us in peace." Her mother, who had been listening inside, came out, spat on the ground beside him, and slammed the door shut with a force that rattled the frame. The rejection was final, absolute. Chukwudi sat in the rain for hours, his body shaking, his cries swallowed by the thunder. The neighbors watched in silence, some pitying him, others satisfied that the once arrogant man had finally been brought low. When dawn came, he dragged himself away, his soul emptier than his pockets. For the first time, he realized he had nowhere to go. No wife, no mistress, no friends, no siblings, no home. He was truly alone. In a last desperate attempt to salvage his pride, Chukwudi dragged Titi and Chief Agbo to court, hoping to reclaim them all. He arrived in worn clothes, his once proud gait reduced to a shuffle, but his eyes still burned with a flicker of hope. He believed the law would side with him, that he could prove them all was his blood and sweat. The courtroom was packed with curious onlookers eager to witness another episode of his downfall. Journalists filled the benches, pens poised to capture every detail. Even Ngozi was there, seated at the back with a smirk, waiting to watch him crushed once more. The judge listened as Chukwidi's lawyer argued passionately, but when the defense produced the signed documents, the case collapsed instantly. Every signature was his, every clause airtight. The judge shook his head, calling him reckless and careless, declaring that the mall legally belonged to Titi and her associates. Murmurs of laughter filled the room. Some clapped mockingly, others whispered insults. Chukwudi stood frozen, his mouth open, his world spinning as though the ground itself had betrayed him. He tried to protest, but the judge silenced him sharply, reminding him that the law does not protect fools blinded by pride. As he stumbled out of the courtroom, cameras flashed, reporters shouting questions. "Mr. Okeke, how does it feel to lose everything to a mistress? Will you be returning to your wife now that you are broke?" Each question pierced him like arrows. Ngozi walked past him, leaned in, and whispered venomously, "I told you, didn't I? Pride goes before a fall." Titi, arm in arm with Chief Agbo, strode past him without a glance, her laughter echoing like a victory bell. By the time Chukwudi reached the street outside, his knees gave way, and for the first time in his life, he wished the ground would swallow him whole. For a short while after the courtroom victory, Titi walked through Enugu as though she were untouchable. She renamed herself Madame Plaza, threw lavish parties inside the mall, and strutted about with Chief Agbo glued to her side. She basked in the attention, mocking Miriam in whispers and sending cryptic messages to Ngozi, saying, "I have what you both never could keep." Her pride swelled beyond measure, but the same extravagance that lifted her up became the rope that strangled her. She drained the mall's finances on parties, imported luxuries, and reckless decisions. Shop tenants began complaining of inflated rents and poor management. Behind the glamour, cracks widened, though Titi was too intoxicated by her own triumph to see the storm gathering. It came without warning. One evening, smoke rose from the mall's second floor. Poor wiring, ignored during rushed construction, sparked a fire that devoured the plaza in flames. Shops burned, merchandise worth millions turned to ashes, and panicked tenants screamed in the night. Titi arrived, wailing in horror, but Chief Agbo was nowhere to be found. He had already fled, withdrawing every remaining cent from their joint accounts. The next morning, newspapers carried the devastating headline, "Titi Plaza reduced to rubble, owners nowhere to be found." The same city that once clapped for her now pointed fingers, whispering that she had brought the curse upon herself. Her glittering reign ended overnight. Tenants sued her, creditors hounded her, and Chief Agbo abandoned her completely, flying abroad with another woman. Once celebrated, Titi now walked the streets in shame, her expensive gowns pawned, her jewelry sold, her name smeared. She had mocked Miriam and Ngozi, but now she was the one mocked. People laughed, saying, "So this is the queen who built her palace on ashes." With no allies left, she vanished into obscurity, a cautionary tale that gossipers recounted in hushed voices. The mall that was supposed to crown her glory became the fire that consumed her. Chukwidi's fall did not end with the courtroom disgrace, it only deepened. Homeless, penniless, and shunned, he wandered the streets of Enugu like a beggar, begging for food. rejected by those who once bowed before him. His health began to fail rapidly. Stress etched deep lines on his face, coughing fits racked his chest, and his once broad shoulders shrank under the weight of humiliation. Eventually, he collapsed on a roadside one afternoon and was rushed by strangers to a small government hospital. There, lying on a rusted iron bed in a dimly lit ward, he realized the full depth of his ruin. The man who once held keys to mansions and fleets of cars now slept on torn sheets, listening to cockroaches scuttle in the corners. The nurses recognized him. They whispered as they passed, pitying him but unable to hide their curiosity. "Is this not the man who built a mall for his mistress?" one said. See how pride has finished him," another replied. Their voices reached his ears like daggers. For days he lay weak, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying every choice that led him there. He thought of Miriam's sacrifices, of a gold wristwatch she pawned for his dream, of her hands washing his shirts in poverty. He thought of his children's hungry eyes when he dismissed their needs. He thought of how he struck his wife for daring to question him. Regret clawed at his soul with every breath. In the haze of sickness, he begged the nurses to send word to Miriam. His voice was cracked, his lips dry, his pride dissolved into dust. Tell her to come," he whispered, coughing violently. He longed for one more chance to look into her eyes, to beg forgiveness, to touch his children's hands. But even as he waited, he knew deep down that the distance between them was no longer just a matter of miles. It was a matter of choices, scars, and wounds too deep to be healed. When Miriam finally entered the hospital ward, her presence filled the space with quiet strength. She walked in with her children at her side, her wrapper simple, her eyes calm but cold. Chukwudi's heart leapt and broke all at once. He tried to sit up, his trembling hands reaching toward them, but his body was too weak. Tears spilled down his cheeks as he croaked, "Miriam, my children." His daughter clutched Miriam's wrapper tighter, refusing to step forward. His son stood stiffly, his face blank, as though the man on the bed was a stranger. The silence that filled the room was heavier than any insult. Miriam placed a small loaf of bread and a bottle of water on the bedside table. "We heard you were sick," she said simply, her voice steady but stripped of warmth. "We brought this." She did not call him husband, did not reach for his hand, did not speak words of comfort. For her, the man before her was not the husband she once loved, but a broken shell of the stranger who chose pride over family. Chukwudi wept openly, ashamed, realizing that the respect and affection he longed for could no longer be bought, begged, or reclaimed. The children said nothing. His son shifted uncomfortably. His daughter turned her face away, refusing to look at him. Their silence pierced him more deeply than Titi's betrayal or Ngozi's mockery. It was then that he understood the full weight of karma, not just the loss of wealth, not just the mockery of the city, but the coldness of the very ones he once abandoned. He reached out with trembling hands, but none of them moved to hold him. Miriam gathered her children, placed her wrapper neatly around her shoulders, and turned to leave, her silence speaking louder than any words. Days later, as his health deteriorated, Chukwudi begged once more for Miriam to return. She stood at his bedside, her expression calm but unreadable, her children again at her side. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Forgive me, please forgive me. I lost everything, but you are all I have left." His voice cracked with desperation, his tears soaking the pillow. He confessed his sins, the lies, the arrogance, the mistresses, the violence. He begged for one more chance, not to rebuild wealth, but to be remembered as a husband and father, not as a failure. His words tumbled out like broken glass, cutting both him and the silence around him. Miriam listened, her eyes steady. When he finished, she inhaled slowly and replied with chilling clarity, "Forgiveness belongs to God, Chukwudi. I am not God. I carried your name with dignity. I carried your shame with silence, and I carried your betrayal with tears. But respect? Love? Trust? You buried those yourself. You do not reap where you did not sow." Her words fell like hammer blows, stripping away the last remnants of his pride. His son looked away, refusing to meet his gaze, while his daughter whispered softly, "Mama, can we go now?" His heart shattered. He stretched out his hand, trembling, begging them to touch him, to give him one final sign of belonging. But his children stood still, their small faces hardened by years of absence and pain. They had already moved on in their hearts. Miriam turned, lifted her chin, and walked away with them, her footsteps echoing in the ward. Chukwudi's sobs filled the silence, a man begging for love he had already squandered. In that moment, he realized that some regrets cannot be undone, and some wounds never heal. Chukwudi died alone a week later. His final breath rattled through the empty ward, with no one by his side except a weary nurse who closed his eyes and whispered a short prayer. His body was placed in the morgue, but when the funeral day came, the crowd was sparse. A few distant relatives attended, more out of obligation than grief. The same city that once bowed before him now forgot him. His once grand funeral plans. He had once boasted of a burial that would shake Enugu, dissolved into a quiet, pitiful procession. Miriam and her children came, not dressed in grand attire, but in modest clothes. They stood with dignity, their faces solemn, but their hearts detached. When the coffin was lowered, Miriam did not cry. She simply turned away, holding her children's hands, leaving his memory behind in the soil where it belonged. Meanwhile, Titi drifted from bar to bar, a shadow of her former self. She told anyone who would listen that she once owned the grandest mall in Enugu, that she had been the envy of women, that men once begged for her smile. But no one believed her anymore. They saw only a faded woman in torn clothes, her beauty wilted, her voice cracked from too many nights of cheap alcohol and broken dreams. The world she fought to build on the ruins of another woman's home had collapsed into dust. She became a cautionary tale, whispered about in salons and mocked in street corners, as the woman who ate a king and choked on his bones. Miriam, however, rose from the ashes of betrayal with quiet strength. She rebuilt her life brick by brick, raising her children with dignity and teaching them that loyalty, honesty, and humility were treasures no man could take. Though scarred, she never let bitterness consume her. In the end, the story of Chukwudi was not told as the rise of a powerful man, but as the fall of one who allowed pride and lust to blind him. And the story of Miriam endured, whispered by women across Enugu, that even in betrayal, dignity is the sweetest revenge, and silence is the loudest triumph. Please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.